Johnny Venerable Bulbrock, PHNX Cardinals, joined by our guy, Ari Marov. He's been covering the NFL for the 33rd team, and of course, he's the host of NFL Spotlight on YouTube. Just had the pleasure of interviewing Monty Ossenford, Arizona Cardinal general manager, for over a half an hour. Ari, how we doing, my guy?
I'm doing good. It's great to be on with you guys, and I'm a big fan of what you guys are doing there in Arizona. The show, the guests, the discussion, like it's actual football talk, and I love when people just talk down to football. It's pretty awesome.
Oh man, that means a lot to us, Ari. We thought it was a fantastic 35 plus minutes with the Arizona Cardinals architect, and I thought you opened it up very well, telling the man himself, like, people know very little about Monty Ossenfort, but like you weren't just completely oblivious to Monty Ossenfort. You've been following him during his entire kind of NFL career, making his way from, Texans scout to the Patriots organization, back and forth. But what to you made you want to really kind of lock in on the Cardinals general manager for a sit down?
There's a few things here. First of all, like whenever a GM gets hired around the NFL, like guys like us who cover the NFL, maybe we've heard of the guy, maybe we have a relationship with the guy, but average fans are like, who are these people? Like they never heard of GMs. Like we know about head coaches who get hired because they're offensive coordinators, defensive coordinators. We see them every single week. But these scouts or these cap guys, we never hear about them if you're a fan. So getting to know these GMs once they become a GM and where they came from and how it all happened, that was kind of the idea of it. And the show that I do, it's called NFL Spotlight. And every single Tuesday, I have a guest on, whether it's a player, a coach, or an executive who deserves more of a spotlight. So I always wanted to get Monty on because now he's in there for his third year in Arizona. And you guys know the team that he took over when he got there, it was an aging roster. It didn't really have many cornerstones on the team. And as soon as he got there, like seeing him do that big trade on draft night and getting more assets and essentially building this roster up to a point where last year they doubled their win total. And my surprise team going into last year was the Arizona Cardinals. And at one point, you guys were 6-4 and in first place in the NFC West. And I felt like really good about myself. And then, of course, it didn't end the way you guys wanted it to. But I feel like this team is on the rise. And Monty and his staff with David Sears and Rob Kissel. And then, of course, Jonathan Gannon and his young coaching staff, which are all young guys who are brilliant, smart minds who are growing in the NFL as well. I just feel like this team is on the rise and going in the right direction. And I think from a national perspective, I don't think many people are talking about the Cardinals enough, especially what they did this offseason, addressing probably their biggest weakness, which was that defensive front. And at least on paper, from where they were last year to where they are this year, it's just night and day. And I feel like that small difference of adding all those guys could go a long way for this team in 2025.
It's a great interview. I don't want to give too much away, but you were able to ask a lot of questions that, frankly, have not been posed to the general manager, one of which, Ari, being how he felt about the trade down with Houston and subsequently the fact that that pick in the first round was basically tanked by the Houston Texans and CJ Stroud. Like, talk me through like your thought process asking that question and then the reaction from Ossenfort, because like, yes, we all thought that was going to be a top 10 pick. Everybody doing mock drafts entering 2024 is like Cardinals could have the first two picks of the draft. And then it fell all the way to 27. And you could kind of see partially, he was like, yeah, I'm a little bit dead inside from that.
I mean, I remember it as well because when that trade happened on the night of the draft where Houston moves up for Will Anderson, and you see the future one. And if you guys recall, the Texans had 2 first-round picks. It was Cleveland's pick and their own. So if they're going to trade a pick, I thought it would be Cleveland's, and it was like Houston's pick. And I was like, the Texans are a dump. Like David Culley was there. Then Lovie Smith was there. Now D'Amico Ryans is coming in. They draft this quarterback. CJ Stroud at the time, nobody – like there were questions around CJ Stroud if he deserved to be the number 2 overall pick. So I just remember going into that year, and nobody had high expectations for Arizona. So we knew that pick will likely be high. And we thought Houston for sure would be a top 10 pick as well. And now this is how you get a quick rebuild really moving faster than expected. And of course, that pick goes all the way down to 27. The Texans make the playoffs. They win a playoff game. And I mean, Monty gave the classic GM answer of like, yeah, you really don't know what the NFL could happen. A team could go from last to first. But inside, he was like good, like watching the Texans that year. Could you guys stop winning? Like
Right.
I'm sure he had that feeling. So seeing all that happen, I'm sure he felt it. But he and Nick Caserio are close friends. They worked in New England for a long time. And you could also see that he's happy Nick is having that success right now in Houston, where that team went from being so bad to being one of the, I guess, the powerhouses in the AFC, where even last year, the Texans at one point, they made the divisional round and they were down by 1 in the fourth quarter versus a team that ended up making the Super Bowl. So pretty cool to see their success. But I'm sure he was just like flabbergasted the Texans were that good right away.
We were the most obnoxious about it. We had like a tracker. We would follow week by week because, I mean, that was a season that the Cardinals, they were in a full rebuild. We knew that they weren't going to contend. So we're also following their draft picks, and we're just getting our heart ripped out each and every week that CJ Stroud would just march his team down the field for a game-winning drive. And then you would see him win a playoff game, which furthered the pick deeper into the first round. It was unbelievable. But I think they got, as you mentioned, that rebuilt defensive line also includes, a guy kind of in his first year semi a little bit, Darius Robinson, who they utilized at a Missouri there. But it sounds like he did a ton of research on the Cardinals GM. And like through your interview, I learned that his ties throughout the NFL are deeper than I even knew about. What was something that you heard about Austin Fort through your research, talking to other people in the know around the league about the Cards GM?
He was in New England for a very long time. And during that time, they won 4 Super Bowls when he was there in the front office. And one of the things that, while doing the research, I kind of forgot just how many football minds were in New England during that time who would end up becoming GMs. Like Jason Light, who's doing an incredible job in Tampa Bay, also had a stop in Arizona. He was in New England during that time. You look at all the future GMs who were there. Thomas Dimitroff was there. John Robinson was there. Bob Quinn was there. Scott Pioli was there. At one point, I started naming all these GMs to him, and he's like, "Oh, Ari, you forgot about Adam Peters, who's now the Commanders GM." So, like, the amount of guys who were there during the course of his time, I'm forgetting about Dave Ziegler, who was there. Like, there are so many guys who I'm forgetting about as well, who were, started off in New England, had stops over there, and eventually became GMs. And he kind of was able to be there in New England during the course of his time there and basically see all those guys who started as young scouts or young college directors or young cap guys or whatever it is, and see them move up the ladder. And that probably gave him the confidence that he could do the same thing eventually. So he was there. And of course, the biggest mind of them all was Bill Belichick. At one point in the interview, he does go over a story about a player who he scouted, being Matthew Slater, who would go on to become one of the greatest special teamers in NFL history. And he was kind of given the assignment of scouting Matthew Slater, and Bill Belichick randomly emails him and was like, "Hey, do you think we should draft Matthew Slater strictly as a special teamer?" And Monty was like, "Whoa, Bill Belichick is emailing me." And at the time, they didn't really have a close relationship yet. And he basically told Bill, like, "Yes, I would draft this guy in the NFL draft strictly as a special teamer." And of course, a few months later, they used a 5th-round pick on him, and the rest is history. So he was around some brilliant football minds during his course there in New England. Eventually, and one of the things I kind of have respect for him, and I think a lot of executives around the NFL struggle with this, which is leaving an organization on your own. Like, sometimes you get fired, you got to move on. But he decided to leave New England on his own and go to Tennessee in 2020, which essentially was the end of the dynasty in New England. He kind of realized that, goes to Tennessee, joins John Robinson, who he was with in New England. And of course, during that time, the Titans were one of the very best teams in the AFC with Mike Vrabel. And that's kind of where all his success as a, personnel guy really started taking off, and teams started realizing who he is, and he started getting all those GM interviews. So just getting the behind the scenes of who this person is, who is Monty Austinford, how did he get to this point? I think many fans don't know really the person behind all of this. All we know is the name, and now you get to learn more about him and how all this unfolded for him. And being in the NFL for 25 plus years and being part of one of the great dynasties in any sport, he played a role in all of it, and you get to hear his story there in the interview.
I thought it very unique because Austin Ford normally very buttoned up, and he was in the interview, but we get to the privilege of covering Jonathan Gannon, who's very animated, wears his heart on his sleeve. And then Austin Ford is very traditional in what he he gives and doesn't give the media. And I think back, Ari, to the hiring process for this role in 2023. Ron Carthon declined the interview with the Cardinals, took the Titans GM job, is not employed. So Austin Ford, coming from Tennessee, doesn't, maybe he's in consideration for Tennessee's job, maybe not, doesn't get that job. And then the Cardinals actually, I think, interviewed Ian Cunningham, assistant GM of the Bears. He declines the opening. So by fate or by chance, Austin Ford gets this job in 2023. Part of me thinks maybe he's operating, just playing with a little bit of house money when you consider the fact that Tennessee didn't want him. They've already gone through a general manager. Ian Cunningham was the hot candidate. He could be out if Ryan Poles is out eventually. And here's Monty Austin Ford, set up for success better than any of them.
It's very true. And I think part of it also is some of these executives and also coaches, like coordinators, are a bit picky about where they want to end up going, because they do think, oh, we're going to have another shot next year. And that's just not the case always. Like Ben Johnson did it and it worked for him. But I could give you a perfect example of somebody where it didn't work. Byron Leftwich he had the Jaguars head coaching job. It was his, and he didn't want to go there with Trent Baalke. He's not even in the NFL anymore. So some of these situations, there's only 32 of them. And I think some people really got to realize that. And for Monty's case, he interviewed with 4 or 5 different places, from, Chicago, the Giants, the Panthers, the Browns, the Titans after John Robinson was let go. He interviewed there as well. And then eventually, of course, Arizona. And he mentioned in the interview, like, I felt like I had some of those and it just didn't go my way. So, he wanted to become a GM at some point, and he clearly hit his interview out of the ballpark with Michael Bidwell. And that was a very big hire as well, because as you guys know, that was the first time in decades that they went outside of the Arizona building to find a new GM, right? They always were staying in-house when it came to finding their next guy. And they did have 2 guys in-house at the time, Adrian Wilson being one of them, and they decided, no, we're not going to be in-house. We're going to go outside our comfort zone, and ended up hiring Monty Austin Ford. He comes in. He, of course, works with Michael Bidwell to find Jonathan Gannon. There's a whole story there about how they ended up getting him, but we won't get into that right now. But the entire situation there, they find the right GM and they find the right head coach, and we all knew it was going to take some time. This was not an overnight thing where you're able to flip the roster, and he realized that as well. That's why there were no crazy free agent signings in year one. That's why he did make that big trade on draft night to get more assets. But we finally got to see a little bit more aggressiveness last year. We saw some success last year. And then this offseason, to me, was really let's try to really push forward and try to make a playoff run here this year. And that's the way it should be done. It kind of reminds me a little bit of what Detroit did with Brad Holmes, where he also took over a really difficult situation. He got extra first-round picks from the Matthew Stafford trade. That first year was a full rebuild. The second year, they started 0-6. They ended up winning 9 games that year. And the third year was let's go for it. And, of course, they make the playoffs. And look at them now. It's a bit reminiscent to that rebuild as well. And I kind of like the direction Arizona's going in.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because that was going to be part of my next question about just kind of what you viewed from just kind of speaking to the man one-on-one, and the answers that he provided kind of gave us a glimpse of how adaptable he is as a general manager and how he's willing to pivot and maybe even learn from mistakes. You talk about year 2 in his offseason. He did spend some money. You look at the money that was spent, Justin Jones, Bilal Nichols, Sean Murphy Bunting. Those are 3 players, Ari, that might not even factor into the roster this year. Like, do you get the sense that he's somebody that's not going to sit there and just try to make a square peg fit in a round hole, and he's willing to just adapt and move forward for the betterment of the team?
I look at their offseason last year. You mentioned those 3 players, and part of me also feels like they weren't really sure, do we want to go aggressive? Do we not want to go aggressive? And they kind of ended up being in the middle. And those 3 signings were just, I guess, not worth it. And I feel like this offseason, you go into it, it's like, no, we're going to get the players we want, and we're okay spending this type of big money because we know these players fit what we want over here. Like, obviously, they tried to get Milton Williams, didn't end up working out, but they pivot to the other ego, which is Josh Sweat, who has that relationship already with Jonathan Gannon. You go out there and add Dalvin Tomlinson, who, I mean, he's been on many different teams, but speak to all those teams and the players in that locker room. They all love Dalvin Tomlinson, the player and the personality that he is. Walter Nolan drafting him, like, I think he was a top 5-7 talent in the draft. Is more of just trying to get that fire out of him, which I know Jonathan Gannon will, and I know the signing that they had also of Calais Campbell is probably the most perfect mentor you could possibly get for a player. So all those signings combined together, it just makes a lot of sense for what they needed, and they know what they're getting here. And they were okay being a little bit more aggressive and knowing what they want going into year 3. Even like the Will Johnson pick, which we didn't really speak about on the show. Like, a lot of teams had concerns with the longevity with all those injuries that he had. But if Will Johnson comes in and is just a one contract guy for you guys, but he ends up producing during that one contract, taking him in the second round where he's a top 15 talent and it gives you 4 good years, that's worth it to me. Like, I know there's longevity concerns, but if you get 4 good years out of a second round player like him, that's already worth it. And anything more is obviously great. So I just love everything they did this offseason and realizing where they were. And I think they knew a little bit more about where they were this year compared to where they were last offseason.
In 3 drafts, Ari Ossenford, every pick is still with the organization in some way, shape, or form. Most are on the active roster, and then a couple are on the practice squad. One that's not on the practice squad, Marvin Harrison Jr., that you touched on with him, his body transformation. Talk to us about how you feel, going into year 2 with MHJ. Ossenford still very confident, as he should be. I think what gets lost in the messaging is, Marvin Harrison Jr. was asked to come in here and be an X-receiver on a run-heavy team with expectations to try to make the playoffs. And the comp we usually make, Ari, on our show is Malik Neighbors got double-digit targets most weekends because, the Giants were terrible. Brian Thomas Jr., spam targets. The Jags were terrible. I think there should be a sense of urgency from Ossenford's standpoint of, we have to make sure this pick works, in large part because I took him 4th overall.
I definitely agree there. And there were glimpses last year of number 4 overall pick, best receiver in the draft. This guy is built different. And you kind of hear Monty Ossenford mention in the interview, just rookies coming into the NFL. There's a lot of new things you're kind of not ready for. And he mentioned that. And I wonder if that kind of applied a little bit to Marvin Harrison Jr. Was he trying to give us a little bit of a hint over there? But he mentioned this year just him being in the building quite literally every single day and the body transformation. And like he said, it shows when you see him right now. He's a different player, different receiver, different body, different everything going into this year. And that is something that I think NFL teams should be like, all right, this is going to be number 4 overall pick, Marvin Harrison Jr., the son of the great Marvin Harrison. Like, this is the time right now for him. So he was my number 1 receiver last year. Everything you said about Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas, that is definitely true. They did get a lot of targets on really, really bad teams with a number of different quarterbacks throwing the ball to them because they didn't know what else to do. This is Kyler Murray in a situation where they were trying to make a run last year. So it was a little bit different, but this is somebody who I think you could force feed the ball to. Like, I think he's somebody who could do that. And be that type of X receiver who is really, really special. And he's been putting in the work this year. And there's other pieces on this offense, which essentially means you cannot always double him. Like, Trey McBride was also on my show last year, and he is somebody who is really becoming arguably one of the very best tight ends in the NFL who still does not get talked about enough for what it's worth. So he's a really, really special player. You hope that Michael Wilson takes that next step. James Conner is still an outstanding running back. And I also just think the offensive line, which is, in my mind, above average compared to other teams around the NFL, you hope it takes that next step and it gets a little bit better as well. So I just look around this team. There's too much talent over here for it not to work. And Drew Petzing as well. I know sometimes his play calling can be a little bit annoying and just like you wish it could get a little bit better. But he's also a young guy who's also getting better at his craft. And I feel like the longer it goes with him, the better he's going to get. And I think he's going to understand that, hey, we could do more of Marvin than what we did last year.
Yeah, pretty in-depth assessment of the offense, which is running it back. I mean, as much as possible, right? A lot of continuity there, leaning into the chemistry. We'll end with this, Ari, because you do talk about the improvements they made defensively, what your thoughts were about the Cardinals going into 2024. They were kind of your under-the-radar team. They almost made you look brilliant, but we know they let us all down at the end with a 2-5 finish, albeit, as Ossenford points out, 3 of 4 games they were decided by 1 score. What are your expectations now with the Arizona Cardinals going into 2025? It seems like it's pivotal for all parties involved.
Yeah, I mean, I still have high hopes for this team, and I'm not really in the prediction business that much, to be honest with you. But for me, if they're able to have a above 500 year, that would be a positive for me. The only thing for them that I think will be difficult is just the change going on in the NFC West. Like the 49ers are going to be healthier. The Seahawks, we'll see what Sam Darnold, is he better than Geno Smith? We'll see, of course, the Rams, who started off just so terribly last year and then turned it around. I feel like they had the momentum going into this year. And frankly, adding a guy like Devontae Adams to replace Cooper Kupp, I think is a very, very big difference there, because Devontae compared to Cooper, at least to me, I feel like he's a much better player at this stage of their career. So the NFC West is definitely deeper right now, but I just look at where the Cardinals are from a roster standpoint, and I just think about Jonathan Gannon and his defensive mind, and Nick Rallis, the defensive coordinator, who is still just incredibly young at what he's doing. I think he's 32 years old, which is crazy for a defensive coordinator. Adding all of those pieces to that defense, seeing what they could do with all those guys, and kind of staying fresh. Those guys came from Philadelphia. The defensive line in Philly, it is just so deep. They were able to always rotate those guys in and out and keep on having fresh bodies. I feel like the Cardinals could have the capability of doing that this year with all the guys they have there on the defensive front. I want to see if they'll end up doing that. If they do, how much of a difference does that make when you're keeping all those big guys up front, fresh throughout a game, week to week, and how much of an impact that makes? I think that is one that I'll be watching for sure with that revamped defensive front.
One of the best in the business. Ari, we appreciate your time. Check out his interview with GM Monty Ossenford. Subscribe on YouTube, NFL Spotlight with Ari Mero. And again, follow him on Twitter, although I'm sure you're following him right now with the 33rd team. Ari, we appreciate your time, my friend.
Anytime, guys. Great to be on.